What's going on, everybody? I want to speak about a situation from a few years ago. A big talking point in the welterweight division was always Keith Thurman ducked Errol Spence. And it was a narrative that was pushed for a very long time by Errol Spence and his fans that Keith Thurman should have fought him. Keith Thurman refused to fight him. And now in return, Errol Spence will never fight Keith Thurman because he feels like he needs to, repay him back and kind of get his revenge on Keith Thurman. So let's go over the facts first of how Keith Thurman ducked Errol Spence. Keith Thurman has been the champion for the WBA, I want to say either 2015 or 16. He beat Robert Guerrero. Now at this point, Errol Spence was not really known like that. He had just sparred Floyd Mayweather. That was his claim to fame. He was kind of working his way up. Then Keith Thurman beat Sean Porter in 2016. This is after Sean Porter had beaten Adrian Broner. Now, just to put this into context, Errol Spence was on the undercard of Sean Porter and Adrian Broner. And then after beating Adrian Broner, Sean Porter fought Keith Thurman, and Keith Thurman beats him. So at this point, Errol Spence is fighting on Sunday afternoons in Coney Island, guys that you never heard of, that kind of thing. And at this point, he still has never been a world champion. Then Keith Thurman fights Danny Garcia in, I think it was March of 2017, to unify the titles. He beats Danny Garcia, and he's got 2 titles now. He's the number 1 guy at the division. Him and Brook, I guess you could argue. At this point, Terrence Crawford's still at junior lightweight. Errol Spence has not won a title at this point yet. A month later, or 2 months later, whenever it was, I think it was in May or April of 2017, Errol Spence beats Kell Brook in the UK. So he gets Kell Brook's world title. So at this point, those guys are the 2 champions, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was Keith Thurman and Errol Spence. Those were the 2 guys at the division. Keith Thurman got injured. And Keith Thurman's inactive because Thurman got injured during the Danny Garcia fight. He claims it was actually before that. He got into the fight with injury. He's having elbow surgery. Keith Thurman from 2017, from March 2017 to January 2019 when he fought Josecito Lopez, was out of boxing. During this time, Errol Spence is fighting a whole bunch of fights. He's fighting Mikey Garcia. I think he fought Sean Porter at that point. He fought a few other people. At what point was he supposed to fight? That's what I'm trying to understand. At what point was Keith Thurman supposed to fight him? Because by the time he came back, he fought a tune-up fight versus Josecito Lopez, which I think is pretty reasonable when you're out of the ring for your 2 years. And then he fought Manny Pacquiao after that. So when was he ducking Errol Spence? It makes no sense. It's just some nonsensical narrative that's been pushed around the internet. I don't really see it. And then he loses to Pacquiao. And then Pacquiao was supposed to fight Spence, but Spence pulls out of the fight. And then Spence fights Ugas, who beat Pacquiao. And then Thurman makes his comeback to fight Barrios. So I'm just not really understanding when exactly he was supposed to fight him. And if Keith Thurman was supposed to fight Errol Spence when Errol Spence was a prospect, then shouldn't Errol Spence fight Jaron Ennis now? But why, when Errol Spence doesn't fight Jaron Ennis, is that not the same thing? Why is he not ducking him? It's no different. Right now, Spence is the man, and Ennis isn't big enough. The same way when Thurman was the man, Spence wasn't big enough. And, I got to give Keith Thurman credit. He gave a great example. He said when Sean Porter was champion, after beating Devin Alexander, Keith Thurman was on the come-up, and Keith Thurman wanted to fight Sean Porter. They didn't give him the fight. And then Sean Porter, he goes and loses to Kell Brook. Then Thurman becomes champion after beating Guerrero. He still gave the fight to Sean Porter. He wasn't like, oh, because you didn't give it to me, Sean, I'm not going to give you the fight. He's like, no. The circumstances then were different. And now the circumstances are different today. Yesterday's price isn't today's price. And I don't understand why Errol Spence isn't the same way, why he holds such a grudge against Keith Thurman. Like, Thurman didn't fight me. I'm not gonna do that back to him. I'm gonna get him back. Keith Thurman had that same situation with Sean Porter when Sean Porter didn't fight him, and he then fought Sean Porter. So I don't really understand why people say that Keith Thurman ducked Errol Spence. It's one of the biggest myths in boxing. And I don't think Keith Thurman ever ducked Errol Spence. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe.